realize how bad I looked. But yeah, it was just a very different look for sure. But
it was a different era. It was 2018 or 2019. It was 2019. It was a year ago, 2 years ago.
Start of 2019 though.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So it takes a lot of maintenance, is why I like just having grown I just let it go. So now it looks terrible, but I don't have to do anything to make it look terrible, as opposed to putting a lot.
Great right now.
Well, thank you, sir. All right, let's get started. Hit me with the read.
When injury takes you out of the game, it's time for your team to step up. At Allina Health Orthopedics, you'll get expert care backed by a whole health system of providers. With convenient locations, virtual options, and an app that gives you 24 access to your records, test results, and care team, you're always close to the care that you need. Schedule now at allinahealth.org/ortho.
Good morning, afternoon, or evening, depending on when this finds you. Welcome to the Sound of the Loons podcast, presented by Allina Health Orthopedics. I'm Steve McPherson, and I'm joined by Callum Williams. Cal, before we get into the Super Draft, it is the day of the Super Draft. My Netflix recommendation for the week is Lupin. I believe it is very popular right now on Netflix, and I had a friend recommend it to me. It is a French heist burglary show, and I love a good heist show, and it's super charming. It's great. It's like 5 episodes to the end of part 1, which is a bit of a cliffhanger. So hopefully there's a part 2 on the way. But have you heard of Lupin? I recommend it highly.
It popped up, when you open up Netflix and there's always that premiere show that they're trying to force down your throat.
Yes.
That was how I saw it. And it's on the list for sure. But I've been doing a lot of traveling, Steve, so I've not had a chance to watch much. But in terms of recommendations, whilst we're on that subject, highly recommend a podcast called The Crafty Rogues, which is recorded here in the Twin Cities by an Australian and a Northern Irish chap. It's full of laughs, mainly soccer talk, some other real-world conversations for sure as well. But it's very funny. I think they are extremely sharp, and I think they give the Men in Blazers a run for their money. I really do.
Ooh, big talk.
Big shout, I know.
Yeah, I have listened to it a couple times. I don't listen to podcasts anymore because I don't go anywhere. So I rely on going to and from work to get my podcasts in. So occasionally when I shovel snow, I will listen to podcasts. But mowing the lawn is a great time too. But I don't mow the lawn anymore because there's snow obviously everywhere. So, but that is a good one to check it out. One last note on Lupin for anybody checking it out: if you just play it, it will play the dubbed version where there's people speaking English, even though it's in French. I tried to hang with that for a little bit, and then pretty quickly my wife and I were like, let's just turn on subtitles, because there's something about, to me, dubbing is like, it's like when somebody is talking and you're like, what is that? And they're like, oh, don't worry about it. Like, it feels like they're saying something else and then something is being put over the top of it. So I would prefer to just read the subtitles and hear the French. I speak a little bit un peu of French, and so I like, it helps me hear a little French, so I like it.
I'm with you completely, Steve. Dubbing always makes me laugh because you're obviously different languages have different dialects and everything, and you will hear something being said, and then the person is still talking as the sentence has completely stopped, as the words have stopped coming out of the mouth, and all you can see is, and it's a bit distracting, really, isn't it?
Yeah,
so I'm with you completely.
I don't hate it on animation, like there's some people like Hayao Miyazaki is one of my favorite directors. He did Spirited Away and Princess Mononoke and a lot of fantastic films. And a lot of people swear by watching the originals with subtitles. If it's in a foreign language and it's animation, obviously it's already sort of, it can be a little bit flexible with how the mouths move. So I don't mind it as much on that. But yeah, for actual film, I am all about subtitles. Let's talk about the Super Draft. It is today at 1 p.m. Central Time, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. I have to make that adjustment every time I get a notice from the league about what time everything is happening. A couple things to just lead off with, some adjustments for the draft this year. This was something that I found interesting. I was actually not aware of it until I spoke to Amos McGee, the director of player personnel, the other day. And he was talking about, for this year, because of the weirdness of the pandemic and seasons being canceled and possibly players playing in the spring, they're allowing teams to select players and then let them continue their college eligibility playing in the spring or maybe even the fall before starting in 2022 to give them a little more evaluation time. Amos talked about it sort of akin to the MLB draft, I believe, which is like you could either take somebody who's done with college, or you can take somebody and then you have their draft rights, but they go to college and everything like that. It seems like a good idea, and one of those things maybe you would want to consider just perpetuating in order to give teams a little more flexibility, because we've talked before, and I've talked to some of the players as well about, the oddness. College soccer is important, and it is what it is. It produces good players, but it's like players play in an incredibly compressed window. They play a lot of games in a short amount of time. It's not like seeing, players over the course of a whole season. Almost to a person, every draftee who plays college soccer who I've talked to hits a wall somewhere because they're used to the season being, 3 months. And then instead in MLS, it's, 8 months, 9 months, something like that. So it seems like a good idea. Maybe they want to consider sort of carrying this into just regular draft behavior, I think.
Yeah. I mean, it takes a little bit less pressure off just about everybody, I think. It allows you to continue to evaluate as well, whilst also allowing the young individual to carry on playing as well. Particularly from the notion what you just mentioned, Steve, in terms of them carrying on playing collegiate soccer as well, because that's the biggest issue, I think, that that certain Major League Soccer teams have got to deal with, and that's not having anywhere for the young lads to play. You're okay if you've got a USL affiliate. You're okay if you've got some sort of understanding or an agreement that your young players will go and play at this certain USL team or elsewhere. But for those that don't, it can be tricky. And Minnesota have absolutely been in this conversation in the past. You'll remember in 2018, they wanted to try, desperately, they wanted to try and get Carter Manley out on loan and play some meaningful minutes. And it took them a lot longer than what it really should have done. Through no fault of their own. It was just difficult trying to find somebody, to find a team that was in need of a right back at that particular stage. And eventually, obviously, he ended up going out on loan. But I think it's a lot easier if you've got, an affiliate or a USL team of some sort. They don't come cheap, by the way. It's not as simple as, right, well, click the fingers and here's a USL team for you to put all your players in. It's running costs. I think I saw something the other day suggesting it's something like $250 million to launch and run your own USL team every year. So again, that's not cheap. But it's the point I'm making here, Steve, is that if that's not an option, then it seems to be the next best thing by saying to people, right, well, you can carry on playing collegiate soccer and we'll continue to assess you. We've got your rights, so we're going to continue to assess you, and we'll go from there. And I think that seems to be a good thing moving forward for sure.
Yeah, and I think that the question of rights is always can be a gray area, and the question of I know this has come up before with as far as like discovery and who has rights to different players based on where they're from or things like that. It gets hairy, but it's one of those things that it can always be negotiated. It's one of those mechanisms that if you have the rights to a player, you can maybe it's possible to trade those rights. Maybe it's a way to get other things out of the deal. This is now we talked about it a little before getting on air, but I'm working on an article looking at all these budget mechanisms for roster creation and things like that. And so now I'm thinking about everything in terms of these like moving pieces for how all the parts fit together. And so things like having rights to a player is one of those things that teams can trade to turn them into assets. And I think that's a helpful way, especially now, to look at the draft. We're going to get into Minnesota's sort of draft history a little bit here. And it's a thing that it's one way that this draft is different than a lot of other drafts, that I think you can't just simply look at it as like, did you get a player and did that player play a lot for you and then retire as a player on your team? That's not really how it works. Players, they can do well, and then what can you get for them farther down the line? Can they help your team can they provide essential minutes, but then can you move them for something else down the line? Sort of starting from that place, looking back at Minnesota's draft history in 2018, obviously in 2017 drafted Abu Danladi, who had a great first season, and has looked good in stints, but obviously was taken in the expansion draft by Nashville, has always sort of struggled with injury. So hasn't, didn't pay out the way you would hope a number one pick would. But in 2018, drafted Mason Toye and Wyatt Omsberg. Wyatt Omsberg was incredibly tall, and plays, and this, he was traded to Chicago, I believe, for Raheem Edwards, who had some solid stints for the Loons last season. And then Mason Toye is ultimately really a success story for Minnesota United, I think, at this point. If you look at the fact that drafted, interestingly, bought that draft pick, the 7th pick, from Montreal for 150,000 GAM, drafted Mason Toye, and then traded him back to Montreal for 600,000 in GAM, and was a Generation Adidas player. And so essentially cost Minnesota nothing that during that time. That's huge. Like that's a good payout, actually. So I think Mason is a great guy, and still has has potential to become a really good player. I hope he does for Montreal. But as far as just those investment pieces, I mean, how can you say no to paying 150,000 and getting $600,000 back down the line?
Mason Toye was an incredible success story from a business point of view for Minnesota United, for sure. And let's not forget as well, Steve, Minnesota were able to grab the money that they did under the impression and understanding that Mason Toye was going to run down his MLS contract and go on a free transfer to Europe at some stage as well. So knowing all of that, I think it's an incredible piece of business for Minnesota United. I really do. He got better, no doubt, throughout the years. He was incredibly raw when he first came to the club. I remember in what seems like another world nowadays, being up at the training centre and staying behind and watching some of the finishing drills that he would do. Worked a lot with Adrian Heath, and particularly with assistant coach Ian Fuller. There was a lot to work on. I don't want to be unkind, but there was a lot to work on. He was a natural athlete, but he only started playing soccer at the age of 14, to my knowledge. And here he was at 19. So there was a lot to learn. In high school soccer, it was very much the case of he would get the ball, he would put the ball past somebody, and then he had the space and he had the time and particularly the pace to get past people, and just run at people and shoot from range and score goals. And it was no problem high school stuff, but it's not how the professional game works. It's all about timing and precision and body shape and composure and all of the above, And Mason had a lot to work on and still has a lot to work on. And I hope he does really well in Montreal. I think just about everybody at the club does, really. He's got a fabulous person to learn from. His hero, Thierry Henry. But as you said, ultimately, I think the timing was right to sell when they did, because, like I said, unless things have changed, to my knowledge, he still wants to go to Europe. And he's still young. MLS, I'm sure, will always be an option for him. So I understand that the lust to go abroad. I get it. But let's just see what happens over the next six to 8 months, because I think it could be a really pivotal time in his career for sure.
Yeah. And then the year after, 2019, obviously, I don't know how much more needs to be said about drafting Dane St. Clair, Chase Gasper, and Hassani Dotson. That's really, I think, one of the best hauls from any draft that any team has gotten over the last several years. So again, Minnesota United just doing well. I mean, I don't want to spend too much time on those guys because I feel like we've talked about them recently and we're going to keep talking about them into the future. But yeah, anything you wanted to add on 2019 and making those fantastic selections?
Well, like you said, Steve, it was probably one of the best draft classes from a teams picking individuals ever in Major League Soccer. To get the 3 players that Minnesota did, we knew the potential was ripe, but to actually thrust them into the first team in the manner in which they were put into it was wonderful. It really was, and they all had solid second years. I think Dane St. Clair obviously was the more advanced of them all because he didn't play in 2019. And I think there's a lot of hope and there's a lot of potential for the 3 players moving forward. But I would go as far as saying, Steve, given the pick that Hassani Dotson was, which was 31, remember, that means just about everybody in Major League Soccer passed on him. Minnesota obviously had already drafted St. Clair and Gasper at that stage, but for a long time they had their eyes on Dotson. And I think it's a testament to those who are a part of the scouting department or who were a part of the scouting department at that stage to identify him, because nobody else really saw him as being a major option. And so to go and pick him, to go and pick someone like that at pick 31, to me, is whoever decided to make that pick deserves a major pat on the back, because I would go as far as saying, Steve, I think Hassani Dotson could be identified as the best draft pick ever, at least at this point in Minnesota United's history, because of what I think he's going to go and become. It's very easy to say that after the first 2 years of his career. I think it's tough to judge anybody in 2020, but certainly 2019 was a wonderful campaign from him. And he gave us a glimpse of what could potentially be. So I'm excited to see what Hassani Dotson can become. I think, as I said, we've already seen little snippets of it. But for me, in my opinion, considering the number at which Minnesota drafted him at, I think Hassani Dotson, as it stands, is the best draft pick Minnesota United have had in their short MLS history.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Hassani's got potential to be one of those Kawhi Leonard, Giannis Antetokounmpo type, late picks, who went sort of under the radar for whatever reason. I mean, in Hassani's case, probably because of the program and things like that, like the size of the program. But getting a guy like that is huge. We're going to get into some questions from fans, but in a moment. But right now, when injury takes you out of the game, it's time for your team to step up. At Allina Health Orthopedics, you'll get expert care backed by a whole health system of providers. With convenient locations, virtual options, and an app that gives you 24/7 access to your records, test results, and care team, you're always close to the care you need. Schedule now at allinahealth.org/ortho. All right, so we went to the tweeters and asked for some fan questions. I'll just sort of pick and choose a little bit. Some people's questions overlap. So I'll start with saying Knock of the North, not really a question, just said needs versus wants. But I presume it's sort of a question of what are you looking for? What is the team looking for in this draft? I think that I'm going to start by talking about, and again, because this is where my head is at, there's essentially 3 mechanisms for getting players, transfers or trades. So, bringing players from outside of the league or transfers within the league, the SuperDraft, and then academies. I think that's it, right? That's basically how players get here. And if you think about these, they all have different sort of long-term versus short-term, expensive versus cheap. Transfers and trades fill needs immediately. You're usually, if you're doing that, you're getting a guy, to say, this is the guy we need for this point. Sometimes you're investing in a younger player, but a lot of the time it's to say, but this is our need, we're filling it. But it's obviously the greatest immediate expense. It costs a significant amount of money to get somebody in. Homegrown players can appear relatively cheap, and can also be sold for profit, as we've seen in MLS between, the Philadelphia Union doing a great job. Alphonso Davies, obviously a huge success story, but running an academy is extremely expensive, like overall as an expense. Obviously you're bringing in lots of kids to hopefully find one of those kids that turns into a $17 million, $20 million like transfer fee. Minnesota United is right now in the process of creating a youth development program, sort of changing the way things are done to address the way that Minnesota particularly is with youth soccer. And hopefully that pays dividends, but it's not really there yet. So the academy is not sort of a pipeline for Minnesota. The SuperDraft is extremely cheap. Especially when you're looking at Generation Adidas players and things like that, you're essentially picking these players up there's no transfer fee or anything like that, but it can also pay dividends, as we said about Mason Toy. So it's one of those things that the draft, obviously you're not filling a specific need necessarily right away, nor are you investing long-term in something that might pay off in millions of dollars. It can happen, but it is sort of this middle ground of it's cheap and you can get value. You can turn that value into something more. It seems like looking at the draft this year for Minnesota, the outstanding needs, sort of, if you're just looking at needs on the table, is a forward, who can keep up with Reynoso, be at that level and work with Reynoso, or wing depth, having Kevin Molino going to the Columbus Crew. Filling either of those roles is not likely from the draft, and not certainly in the immediate future. I think that best player available, which is a phrase often uttered about the draft. Like, you don't pick somebody who you need at a particular position. You say, this is the best person on the board, I'm going to take them. That's always an option. But I think if you're looking just sort of at that forward wing position, there's really nothing wrong with picking one and seeing what you get. Again, if you're thinking about these different mechanisms, worst case, it costs you very little and gets you nothing, like nothing pans out. Best case, you find a diamond in the rough and somebody who can contribute now or in the future, who can either become a regular starter, or it can be a depth piece, or it can be sold on to, another club that needs one of those pieces. Again, forwards and wingers are very valuable. Adrian Heath never tires of saying that's why they get paid the money they do, because getting goals is the hardest thing. So if you find somebody who can get goals, even if they don't fit in your long-term plans, you can move them on for money somewhere else. So that's sort of where I'm thinking about the needs versus wants. I think before Minnesota United has drafted for need in certain positions, balancing needs and wants with just the 25th pick in the first round and the 11th pick in the second. Is that right? In the second round? I'm trying to remember. Okay. We're talking about the deep draft. So I think it's time for a flyer. You go for what you can get. And, I know they've done their research, as we've seen. Minnesota United knows how to do a draft. So pick it and see what you got. The team is pretty solid front to back as of right now, with a couple places that are hoping to be filled, through transfers in the future. So that's where I think the team's at. What about you, Cal?
This is the thing about it, Steve. The team are not as deep as the coaching staff would like it to be, but it is a deep roster. And I think it's we could possibly have said that coming into last year's roster as well, although there were certain needs for backup positions here and there. After you spoke to Amos McGee, and after we had a little chance to chat to him, it was still sort of unclear as to what really the hope is from this draft. I sort of, to my understanding, they could potentially be looking for somebody that they could grow and develop. But in this league, I think it's always handy to have individuals that can come in and contribute straight away when needed, if they are there and available. So for me, straight away, Steve, you mentioned some of the positions where there is a need right now. There's an obvious need. The most obvious of them all is Minnesota need a centre forward. They need a goal-scoring centre forward. They need a proven centre forward. They need someone who is going to go and score 15, 20 goals a year. Do you get that in the draft? It's very unlikely. But that doesn't mean you can't go and draft a young kid who is impressed and can be considered a backup player and can be considered someone who would push the centre forwards that will be on the roster, whenever that will be. I've also wondered as well, do they perhaps have a look at a backup number 10? Because that's something, off the top of my head, that's something that they don't, from a natural position point of view, that's something they don't really have. Mm-hmm. And in the past, when the number 10 has not been available, Minnesota have often switched into a 4-3-3, sometimes to a 4-4-2, certainly in transition. So I wonder, would they perhaps look at a number 10? But again, it comes down to what's available. I keep hearing about this young kid, Daniel Pereira, who's a young Venezuelan player who I am told is a number 10.
Mm-hmm.
And he is very highly rated. Now, the problem for Minnesota is he going to be available at pick number 25? Probably not. So unless they want to trade up, if they see real value there, and unless they want to try somewhere else, we'll wait and see. The only other area that I would see in need of depth, Steve, is probably, again, it's an area that has plenty of depth, but it's the centre of midfield as well. Do you go and have a young player come in to learn from, Will Trapp and Jan Gregush, and if he returns, Ozzy Alonso and what have you, and arguably we've already got that with Hassani Dotson and Jacori Hayes, but is there room for another maybe? I don't know. Is there room for another centre-back? We don't know the situation with one or two of the players there. So I don't know. That there's certainly players incoming in the left-back department, so I don't think there's a need there. Right back, I think the team are fine with Noah Billingsley and Romain Mitsanier. And obviously Hassani Dotson can go there if needed. And goalkeeping area is the least of Minnesota's problems right now. So, right. Yeah, I'm with you. I think, perhaps a young centre forward who could be viewed as someone who would push and challenge. But also I could see, a number 10 for sure. We'll wait and see. Who knows, Steve? Because as I said, with the 25th pick, I think at that point, you said it earlier on, it's got to be at that stage, right, who's the best player available and what position do they play? Right, okay, we'll take a punt and we'll go and take this lad.
Yeah, I think Cal, that the midfield is interesting. As you said, there's good depth there, but we also saw last season with players like Marlon Hairston and James Musa, even at times, like getting a guy who can sort of float anywhere, like from fullback to defensive mid to a little box to box, like a utility player, especially if they're young and not completely defined yet, maybe they can have a tool set that could help at times. As far as, a younger center forward you're talking about, we saw it never hurts to have depth. It's not a thing that Minnesota has often had. I was looking at, I think it was Houston acquiring another center forward, and there's something like 8 forwards on the roster. And I'm like, what is that like? Because Minnesota has rarely had more than 2 or 3. But we saw Aaron Schoenfeld, come in at high leverage moments sometimes last year and do work. Again, Mason Toye is somebody who got a chance to show what he could be, and benefited, the club from making, when the club made a move, it benefited the club. So I think it's not bad to take a flyer on a young forward and see what they can do. Let's see. We'll get to center back depth. Let's talk about center back depth now, because it came up in your response. Jesse Haraldson wanted to know about adding center backs. Having added Callum Montgomery, who's a young center back with a great first name. Yet again, proving my hypothesis that everyone named Callum is involved in soccer in one way or another. Given that the core is, you're looking at Opara, Boxy, Dabasi are all 30 or older. Brent Coleman, who's not a done deal, but, could be back is 30 now. That's an old group of center backs. I'm not super concerned about it because, again, Boxy, which we said last time, Iron Man, like just will never stop going. And I think we saw last season with, like Jose Aja, who contributed. You can sign guys. You can find center backs who are, who are available. You can make the most of those signings. So I don't know if you necessarily need to get some kind of young center back of the future at this point, but having multiple options and depth at that position is a good thing.
Yeah, it's never a bad thing to have depth. I'm interested to see how Callum Montgomery fits in to the group. Should Brent Coleman do a deal, I think it's obvious Montgomery will be 5th choice centre back, and there's nothing wrong with that. Unless you come at least at the start, of the training camp, and then we'll assess, I'm sure. But you never know. You never know. Maybe they see a centre back and they think, oh, we actually really like the way he has the ball at feet. He reminds us of Iko Para, 5 or 6 years ago. He reminds us of somebody that we could really use. maybe they see a holding midfielder who they liken to Alonso, and they see the qualities there. I don't know, Steve, but I think that the centre-back depth, I'm with you. I don't think there's much need to worry. I know the core is over 30, but it's not like they're 35. They're 30, 31, 32. Still good age for professional soccer as a centre-half. It would be really, in my opinion, next year where you really start to think, okay, 33 now, maybe we need to go and have a look at the situation long term. But right now, heading into this campaign, I have no issues with centre half whatsoever.
Let's move. Knock of the North, who asked that other question, and followed up with the question, Cal, about the consensus number 1 pick. From my money, I haven't seen anyone at the top of a draft board who isn't Philip Mayaka. I'm going to just guess that's the pronunciation. MLS Soccer.com's Matt Doyle said he's the most obvious number 1 pick since Kyle Larin in 2015. I watched a little bit of video just after I got the question. He looks good, but it's hard to know how to evaluate that. You're just watching him pass the ball, but obviously people like his tool set. What do you know about Philip Mayaka?
Just that he's been described as dynamic. He's fast. He's strong. He's everything you would want as a first-year player. Really, he's got all the attributes. He's an athlete. The question is now is can he do it from a technical point of view? And that will surely come now over the next few months in terms of training and what have you, and sort of starting to mold his technique, because that tends to be the not issue, but it tends to be the one thing that a lot of college players need to work on, and that's the technical side of the game. And I'm not suggesting for one bit that the collegiate players in this country aren't technical, because that's not what I'm saying. They are. They're very good, and there's a reason why they're involved in the draft. But in terms of doing it consistently at the MLS level, of course you're going to need training. Of course you're going to need to undergo some sessions with players that have been doing it for years and coaches that have been doing it for years. So, as I said, I've seen everything from an athletic point of view that would probably suggest what Matt has said, and said, he's certainly in the top 3. The other one that I have heard a lot about is another one with a great name, Calvin Harris, who, again, I've heard is very smart. He actually has very good technique. He's somebody who I would see going in the top 5. So we'll wait and see. It depends on what the needs are of other teams as well, Steve. I mean, again, there's so much on the number 1 pick, isn't there, in this country? And even in this league where it's not as prevalent and what have you. But I do wonder what Austin FC need from this draft. Obviously, they have the number 1 pick, and maybe there's an area of need for them, and they'll go and draft somebody who's no one's even talked about. So we'll wait and see. But in terms of the 2 names that we've mentioned, I would expect them to go in the top 5. There's teams that do need attacking players. Obviously, Minnesota is one of those teams, but I'd be surprised if Minnesota were to trade up at this point now. I think if they were going to do it, they probably would have already done it. But we have seen in this situation late trades being done right before the draft pick, during the timeouts and have you. But I'd be very surprised, Steve, if Minnesota were to trade up. But stranger things have happened. We'll see. But going off what we've said, I would expect those 2 names to go in the top 5 for sure.
Yeah. Let's do a couple of quick hits here. Just a little spin around the league. I wanted to get your impressions on some more coaching news, which again is sort of the stuff that's happening. Hernan Lozada to DC United, 38 years old, youngest coach in MLS. Your quick take on Lozada.
He's got a good reputation in Belgium. He played the majority of his career in Belgium. My major concern is that he's only been a head coach since 2018. Now, people can adapt to the situations quicker than others. People can certainly take to it more naturally than others, much quicker as well. But that's my immediate concern. and I must admit, I'm quite surprised at this one because it's obvious that they see it as a long-term thing with him being the age that he is, as you mentioned, Steve. But knowing some of the candidates that went in for the job, these are proven candidates. And other people, other assistant coaches around the league that I think are more than worthy of an opportunity. I'm quite surprised they've gone this route. But like you said, they see something. Perhaps they see it as a long-term solution. It is literally a case of let's wait and see. But my immediate concern is that he's only been a head coach since 2018. That doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be a bad coach. It just brings up the question, is he experienced enough for a job of this magnitude? And look, let's not make any mistake here. This is a big season for DC United. They are the original league darling, in my opinion, with all of the trophies that they have in the cabinet from the early, from the mid to late 90s. So we'll wait and see, but it's a big job for him nevertheless.
Yeah, I mean, just based on chatter I've seen on Twitter, Cal, just that, DC United obviously sort of woeful for a number of years and then had Wayne Rooney and sort of goose DC United there, but it didn't sort of turn into sustained success or anything like that. So you're sort of at a position where it's like, okay, see what we can do. We'll get a young guy, give him his chance. If it doesn't pan out, you give him, a couple of years. You're not really losing time. Like you're not wasting the end of Wayne Rooney's career or anything at this point. There, so it's sort of in rebuild mode. Why not go with somebody young, see what they can provide? Also, Cal, your countryman, Phil Neville. It happened with Inter Miami. Nepotism or good choice?
I say this with all due respect. I don't mean to be disrespectful to Phil Neville. We know why this has happened. He's got a very powerful friend who's in charge of Inter Miami. And look, he did a decent job with the Lionesses, with the England national team, the women's national team. I just think I find it a bit odd, Steve, because of the expectation of Inter Miami. I just don't see how Phil Neville is going to walk in and say there's a few results gone the wrong way. I don't see how he's going to command the dressing room. There's some big characters there. Blaise Matuidi, Gonzalo Higuain, just to name a few, Rodolfo Pizarro as well. There's some big players there who will need an experienced manager and a manager that is respected worldwide. I don't think Phil Neville fits that category. From a playing perspective, sure, yeah, he had a great career, but I hope I'm wrong, but I just do not see this working out at all.
Yeah, we'll have to hope for the sort of the reverse Ted Lasso. So bring in the Englishman over to the American game. We'll see if he can succeed there. Last thing I wanted to touch on, Cal, player transfer news: Jordan Morris to Swansea. Your take on that one? What does this mean for the Sounders? What does this mean for, obviously it's another MLS player with hot prospects going to England. That's seems always good for MLS overall. But man, Morris was great. I think the Sounders are going to miss him quite a bit this year.
Yeah. I think we've spoken about this before, Steve, and certainly my feelings of players of his caliber in this league going to Europe and going to certain leagues. I think gone are the days. Well, look, it's absolutely proven now. Gone are the days where MLS would lose big players such as Jordan Morris to Scandinavian leagues and Central European leagues and what have you. It's actually the other way around now. Mm-hmm. There are only, when you're Jordan Morris, and I believe he's still 26, you're absolutely right at the peak of your prime. I understand the want to go because, once again, MLS will always be an option for him because he's a national team player. He's more than proven himself in this league. It will always be an option for him. It's also only a loan move as well. So if it doesn't work out, he can come back to the Sounders, no problem. Mm-hmm. I think I've always said this about players going over to Europe from MLS now. If you're going, you've got to go to one of those leagues that are viewed as top draw and are viewed as being some of the best, and certainly better than MLS. The Championship, in my opinion, at the top end of it is better than MLS. And I actually don't think the level of players that he's going to be playing with consistently is too different at all from the level of players that he'll be playing with at Seattle Sounders, that he has played with at the Sounders. So usually, Steve, I would say to somebody who wants to go to the Championship from MLS, I actually said to a player many moons ago, I wouldn't do it. And I continue to have that mindset. I wouldn't do it. If you're going to go, when, what was it? When Reggie Cannon, a couple of months ago, was linked to Barnsley in the Championship, I said, don't do it. Don't do it. And I say this with all due respect to Barnsley, don't do it, because you're just going to be a mid-table team in the Championship. You may have a relegation scrap from time to time, but you're not going to progress, especially when you're coming from somewhere like FC Dallas, where everything is built on progressing young players. Mm-hmm. For me, I will take a turn in this situation because I understand why Jordan Morris has gone to Swansea, because last time I checked, Steve, they're second in the Championship, and there is a genuine opportunity to play in the Premier League within the next 7 to 8 months.
Yeah.
So I understand it from that point of view. But usually I would say I don't see the reason why you would go other than to experience it from a cultural point of view, life point of view, all that sort of stuff, which I understand. But purely from a footballing point of view, I would usually not understand a move like this. But the counter argument is, okay, you go, you do well, you get spotted, you get bought by somebody else, in which case I understand. But in his point of view right now, in his career, I think a loan move is really smart, because it is low risk, high reward for just about everybody. Mm-hmm. And he's not going to disappear down this cavernous hole that we can't ever find him again if he doesn't do well. He's going to come back to MLS. And for one of the better teams. But I understand it, Steve, because the gamble could very well pay off here. If Swansea do well and go up to the Premier League, all of a sudden Jordan Morris is potentially a Premier League player. So I get it. I understand it this time. And I'm very interested to see what happens with him.
Yeah, when you lay it all out like that, Cal, it seems like the sort of risk reward makes sense across a bunch of different parameters there. As you said, it's a loan deal. And so, if he comes back to Seattle, having had a good spell in Swansea, fantastic. If he becomes an important player for a team that earns promotion to the EPL, like, so much the better. That's great for him. So, yeah, it's one of those things that I'll be sorry to see him go, in the sense that I enjoy teams being good, and Seattle has been fantastic with him. He's really fun to watch with Rui Diaz and Ladero. But good for him. Swansea is fun to say. It's a good word. So that's all about all I have to say about that. So again, the Super Draft today is at 1 p.m. Central Time. You can catch it online. I believe that's the only place it's going to be anymore at this point. So go check that one out. Thanks for joining us for the 126th Sound of the Loons podcast, presented by Allina Health Orthopedics. Be sure to leave us a nice review on iTunes, or at the very least a 5-star rating, and follow the team on Twitter at MNUFC and Cal at CalWilliamsCom. You can follow me at Steve Entris. Apologies, as always, to Richard Wagner. And remember, there's only one person in this whole world like you,